My name is Collene Dunbar, Collene, and it's pronounced Collene.
And your last name is spelled?
Dunbar.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Now, we're here to talk about your life, your life in Richland. So can you tell us when you came here and why?
We came here in 1950. My dad worked in construction. He was a pipe fitter. He held many cards in those days because of travel and all. And the work was not available in Vancouver, Washington, where we lived. So he asked if he could go to someplace close to Richfield, Washington, just out of Vancouver. So when the Union got back to him, they sent him to Richland, Washington, not knowing what was going to happen. So this is how we came in there. So that was a different world then than it is now. So
Can you describe the difference between Vancouver and Richland and how you remember it when your first impressions as a young girl arriving in Richland?
well, it was all desert, and a lot of those years at that time, it was the termination winds, so you got used to that and all the dust. We were close to the Columbia, which was really, really nice, not realizing it was the Columbia that we had come from Vancouver, the same Columbia that came here. So we enjoyed going, we were right by the water. The main highway came from Richland with all the workers from the Manhattan Project, you know, the cleaning up and some of that. And the weather was nice. We liked it better because we could be out more. The water was neat. We watched the Blue Bridge being built. That was kind of nice to watch that as a child, you know. And we would go out for entertainment at nighttime when the big group came through, knowing they were from out in Richland to that place way out there during the Manhattan Project. My neighbor, they had 6, 7 kids, and I got real friendly with one of the girls, and she came in to my house asking my mother if we could go swimming. So what we did, we went up to the irrigation dig, not knowing what it was. And weeks later, my mom found out it was an irrigation ditch that you did not go into. That was the farmers' water that they did watered their farm with, you know, whatever they were growing in those days. A lot of it in town, we had Welch's fruit, and they had the Concord grapes. And there was rows and rows and rows of them, and they smelled so good. They did mint, which is real new to us. When we lived in Vancouver, there was a lot of fruit, vegetables. We would pick strawberries in the summer and start with all the different berries. And I think the last ones were black caps. They were big, so it was really kind of neat to pick those because you felt that you got more money. And then we would do apples. Probably not much more down there. So when we came here, there was the asparagus fields, which we didn't know what was going on. And we would see the people picking it, and we were wondering why, and they had that little knife, sharp knife, just go along and do that. And the grapes, the Concords were very, very popular around here. This is before the wine grapes came in years later, much later. The mint. Oh, and then the alfalfa. They had alfalfa. They were growing that also. So it was kind of interesting coming from an area that had a lot of farming to a totally different kind. And actually, they had apples and different things, but over the years, I've seen all the other things that come in, which is kind of fascinating to watch. And then being aware of what's going on instead of just being a country girl and be a city. So that was kind of fun. We didn't have to pick berries anymore after we got out of school. So moving here was quite a eye opener. We would walk a lot when we came here because we were in town, and we would walk in the summertime. Usually around that's where we would go to Pasco, across the old bridge, old green bridge, and we would go to a place called Young's, and this is where we would go get our Easter dresses. And then we would walk back over the bridge, which was kind of neat. I remember standing with my mom, and it was getting towards evening, and we were visiting somebody down on the Kennewick side that we had ran into, and was seeing a lot of the black people going back over the bridge. And I asked my mom, I said, why is there so many people, the black people, going back over the bridge? She said there's a blue law in the Tri-Cities that the black people have to be back over and into Pasco by dusk. And a 10-year-old child, I'm standing there saying, that is not fair. If they didn't want my money at nighttime, I wouldn't give it to them during the daytime. So this is another thing to learn as a 10-year-old child about this prejudice, which I didn't know growing up. We never had that. My parents weren't like that. So that was another experience that was very interesting.
Were the schools segregated then?
No, as far as I know, I have no idea in Pasco because, we really basically in those days stayed in your town and not very far. So years later when my sister moved to Richland, to go to Richland was a long way in those days. And of course we were clear downtown in Kennewick. So going to Richland, it took, half an hour or so and you didn't go around that much. Another thing that I really, really enjoyed is in the late 40s, I came to see my aunt. She was living in the trailer park in Richland. And as you go up the hill, even now it still has it, but you go up George Washington Way and you did a kind of a loop. And that's where they were. Camp Hanford was the Army, the base there. Right next to it was this camp, the trailer park, and there were rows and rows and rows of them. If you go up there now and wander in that one part off to the left when you first go up the hill to the 300 area, these rows, in those days the trailers didn't have bathrooms. So they would have one bathroom each row, which was quite long, and you would have to walk down there to go to the bathroom, do your showers, do your laundry. So I was about 8 at the time, 7, 8 years old. So, I had no idea where we were. There was parks there. Right across, there was the movie theater fairly close. Right as you come up the hill, we used to go to meet. My aunt was still there when we moved there in 50, and the park right across from Camp Hanford was a park that a lot of people came to, and we would have our picnics. So that was the big excursion for us during that time.
I don't know that.
No, we didn't go into town. We just kind of went out straight out, and that was it. So I don't remember being around there at all.
Right. So what was, Maynard said, and he may not remember which person's story this is, but some story about a hospital where your children were born. Did you have children? Is that your story about Columbia Hospital?
We did go visit early on into Richland. A friend of ours was in the hospital, and it was just all those government houses, and they had built one and not really a hospital. We went in there and was surprised about, it was just like going into a home. So it was kind of interesting, and as high school kids, we would walk around Richland. I was in the choir, and we would go from, the Richland and get all together with all the Tri-City choirs. And we would walk along the Richland streets, and this, I don't know if it was air or what was coming up from the ground. They had grades type where they could see it in all this, I don't even know what do you call it, smoke coming from below. And we would say, oh, that's all the stuff we're staying away from. That's why nobody wants you in Richland. And we were in junior high at the time. So we had no idea what Richland was. And they didn't talk about it much in school. I don't remember that either. So.
But you knew there was something out there you were supposed to stay away from, huh?
Pardon me?
But you knew there was something you were supposed to stay away from.
Yes. Oh, definitely. Richland was kind of a do not go there because of all the atomic stuff.
Did they, I wonder what, since the bombs were dropped in 45, and you're talking about 55 or so, right? You knew the general purpose of Hanford, right?
Correct.
Right. But still people didn't talk about exactly what they did, right?
Correct. And in those days, everything was supposed to be real secretive. And even after Camp Hanford left, that was in 58, you talked about subsidies from the houses in Richland that they only paid rent. But if your light bulb broke, they would come in and take care of that too. So really, they were basically subsidized. And Richland really had the attitude they were just a little bit better than somebody else. They had that for years. And it's probably the last 20 years. It's not like it was then. And at that time we moved in, I think Kennewick was the smallest, and then Pasco, and then Richland. Richland always was the biggest one. And in the years, it's kind of switched around differently. And West Richland is, kind of built up too. And in those days, we didn't know what West Richland was.
So what is the economy of Kennewick and Pasco? Are they totally different from the atomic work, or are they spin-offs? What do people do?
Well, a lot of Richland people, and it was said that if you worked in Richland, they were very, very rich because they didn't have to do this. Painting of their houses were all done. They weren't like regular people. In school, each year they would hand you a piece of paper, and if your parents worked out there, the schools got X amount from the government. So I didn't know what it was. You would see it handed out, not realizing my dad did work out there. So I don't know. I was so young, I really didn't ask what area or anything about that until I went out there in 79.
So why don't you talk again about what your dad did?
Well, I knew he was a pipe fitter, plumber, steam fitter, welder. He did all of that. In Vancouver, with him, what I did, I would go on jobs with him and learn the trade. And I'm sure if he left when I was about 12 and went to different places because there wasn't a lot of work around here. So it was kind of nice to go and learn all of that kind of. And he said, if you go with me, the rules are, you will be a gopher for me. You will know what tool I need and go and get it and bring it back. So that was always, I always wanted to be doing something. So, but other than that, with my dad, there really wasn't a lot by being gone when I was 12. So not too much of here once we got here. Not going on the jobs with him. I remember Big Pasco, going there, doing the sprinklers on that. They had now I'm trying to figure out. I went with him to Kennewick, building the Kennewick School, which is still now there. the sprinklers over the auditorium. And those sprinklers are still there. And I showed my kids that Grandpa put those in, and I'm sure they probably have done it since then. So, but it was experience going with him. So.
So you yourself then worked out in the area, and you then became one of them.
But it was really kind of neat because I went out in 200 area, and that was like 70, it was probably 78. And the group I was with, they were different kind of workers. Some were check the welds in the double wall tanks. That was kind of interesting to watch that go up, and knowing what they were talking about all those years ago. But not until I really worked out there did I really see it. And even then, people were wanting to ask you questions that, and they were finally starting to open up some of that information that we never had before. So. But, like I said, that's about all I can say about my dad and the working and being out there. So
what do you think of Richland today? I mean, you live in Kennewick still. Is Richland still another world, or?
Well, I actually live in Richland. I'm about that far into Richland. And Pasco and Kennewick were always with, football and all of that. And Richland was in a different group, I think, on that. We would get together with them, but if, like I said, Pasco and Kennewick were always back and forth fighting, but not too much in Richland. But if there was a problem in Richland, Kennewick and Pasco would group together to get the big guys in Richland. So there was a distinct things they used to do back and forth to the schools. So, which you don't see as much now. And of course, you got more high schools, and it's just not the small town. It's gotten to be a bigger town. It's quite, in the blocks out there in Pasco. Those were the people that came over after World War II and got the land. And they had to produce something in the land to get the acreage. So something to do with that. I don't know exactly. I don't want to do that unless I know what I'm talking about. So, but that was always interesting to check with people that were in the blocks and find out the background of that. So in '58, when Camp Hanford came out, I think that was about the end of the subsidy for Richland people with the buildings. About that time. So, and then, like I said, all of a sudden it was like they kept saying, years from now, Kennewick and Richland you'll not know where you finished Kennewick into Richland. So that's what I said. Living in Kennewick all those years and living about that close into Richland right now is a little bit different. So I finally, after all these years, said, yes, I do live in Richland on Kennewick. Territorial.
Back to those days when there was that evil smoke coming out of the ground, were there stories that were told? I mean, among the kids, or were there boogeymen, or were there creepy things that you kind of imagined were going on?
Well, it was really kind of different. I think what we were saying is not to find, we should have just said, what is it? But then you've heard so much you didn't dare ask. But that was, really with the smoke coming out of those vents, it was like we would walk and make sure we didn't go underneath those or by them. But you hardly see them now. And I go around and I'm going, what else were they doing then that they aren't doing now? But I mean, this was downtown around Richland, down by where the federal building is now. But it was more or less like kids scaring the other ones. You don't want to be involved in the Richland kids, And the shirts we used to wear, we live in the Tri-Cities, don't stand too close to us. We glow in the dark. So that was always fun to do, you know. So, but it was something, a joke. But it was kind of neat when they finally opened it up because people were very interested, and to this day, they still are interested in what goes on out there. So, but a lot of it's just talk then instead of finding out. But if you're so secretive, you always want to know what's going on.
So what do you think of the efforts to save the B-Reactor and some of the other properties out there and tell the story to the public?
I'm kind of torn personally for that. You know, our friend Gene, he has quite involvement in that, you know, keeping the B-Reactor up and doing a museum and stuff like that. It's sad to see it because I worked out there, you know, and it's just sad to see some of it going, but, you know, open up and, you know, find out, get this stuff cleaned up where people can use that whole area out there. It's a beautiful area where you can, you know, start farming like it is across the river from them.
Have you been out to the B-Reactor?
No, I haven't. I've gone by it. I have not gone to B-Reactor. I worked in 200 East, and that's where the double-walled tanks were being built, and I got to watch them being built. It was kind of neat to watch from the very beginning with that big hole down there and how they poured the concrete. And then my instrumentation guys where I worked, they would take me out and show me how they put in their
Monitors, sensors?
yeah, it was the line, you know, the line where they hooked it all up, and then how they put the stuff around it to find out and do the test and to see if the welds were holding and this kind of. So it was, like I said, that was kind of interesting to watch, and now they're talking about some of those leaking, and I can't figure out how they can, you know, but like I said, I don't know all that, but that was interesting. 200 West, I had gone out a couple of times. That's where the different buildings are. I think those are being torn down, kind of like the 300 area. But you still cannot go past the white barricade, and I'm sure you guys found that out when you went out to take pictures. Certain thing you have to be escorted and stuff nowadays still.
Well, we were.
Mm-hmm.
Did it surprise you how good those people were at what they did, or how efficiently they could get things done? I mean, they were moving pretty quick.
Oh, yes, yes. People think that, you know, when I said I went out to work there, my first thing my mother said, well, how many books did you read? And I goes, what are you talking about? And she says, well, people I talk to, she says, they really don't have anything to do. And I said, I have never worked in a place that I didn't have something to do out there. We're always busy. And I said, I don't want that kind of, you know, things talked about that is not true. But it is, it's fascinating to what they're doing. And this B-Reactor looks like it got a lot of support from people, too. And the crest, I don't know if you went there, that's interesting. You know, they have the guardhouse, they have those old buses out there. And that was sad. They quit doing the buses. They built all this beautiful parking lot. And all those years they had the Bradley parking lot and they built it up and no more buses. So that was always, see, that was a positive also. People living in Richland, they did not have to drive out there. They would go to the bus lot, get a bus, and go out. Now, in the early 60s, after I was married, my cousin worked out there, and he would get on those buses, and he would, for a nickel, he rode all the way out. So, I mean, that was another helpful with them that other people had to strive. That's why everybody said that the Richland people were so much better off money-wise. But they were taking those houses afterwards and selling them, and then they would move out and build a new one. So that's how they have built out towards the 300 area where Camp Hanford was and all of that now. So,
Can you just, for people who don't know what Camp Hanford was, because you've talked about it many times, can you just take a second to say Camp Hanford was and explain what it was?
Camp Hanford was Army Depot for the Just like the Army has different posts. Well, they had one in Richland. It was called Camp Hanford. So
What went on there? It was just the base of operation and distribution.
as far as I know, like I said, we didn't, we saw them there. They kind of kept to themselves and stuff like that, parties. And I'm sure Richland had a different thinking on that because, what they say about these guys, they get leave to get off post. And you couldn't get into the Camp Hanford, the Army base at that time either. So, but like I said, people living in Kennewick didn't know a lot what's going on in Richland.
So when your mom thought that you were out there reading, are there other things you think would surprise people to know about what was going on out there, or the people, or anything? Things that are misunderstood?
The biggest misunderstanding about that is people think there's still a lot of zoomies, is what they call them. When you get out there, you can't believe the security, how they really watch what you're doing, and we can see things in town that if it was done out there in the Hanford area, we would be written up, you would be taken care of. The security, the safety is one of the first things out there in the area. They teach you how to pick things up, and with your ladders, what you do or what you don't do. I thought it was very, very impressive when I went out there. Some things were still security, but I think with any project you're on, you're going to have that, having to have the security. But I'm impressed how much the safety is, what you do and what you don't do out there.
And generally people had to toe the line or else they get reprimanded or...
Correct. And that was before, what do you call them, the whistleblowers. I think the last whistleblower we had was in '88, the two on that, and I just happened to come in to, they took, there was, the two whistleblowers worked for this one guy, and they took them out. They quit, but then my one boss and I were put into that function, knowing that you had to kind of watch, I don't even know how to put that. The people out there, they wanted to make sure that nothing, you weren't rattling the cage, is what they were saying, because you really had to watch those people that were so upset because they were whistleblowers and the repercussions. So that was another reason they had to pick and choose who they put down there too. So that was nice to help with that, but I only got to talk to this one guy once, Anyway, like I said, I was very impressed when I went out there, how well they take care of all of it.